Right now, there's a man somewhere paying for a woman's lifestyle while she disrespects him in public, cheats in private, and still calls him not enough when she doesn't get her way. And the craziest part? He thinks this is what a loyal boyfriend is supposed to do. There's another man who stopped seeing his friends, gave up his hobbies, quit the gym, and rearranged his entire life around a woman who still tells him, "You're lucky I'm with you." He hears that and tries harder instead of walking away. This is what happens when a man doesn't know his value. He doesn't choose relationships. Relationships choose him. He doesn't set standards. He accepts whatever he can get. He doesn't ask, "Is this woman worthy of my effort?" He only asks, "What else can I do so she doesn't leave?" Women don't even have to be evil to exploit that mindset. All they have to do is respond to his fear. A little guilt here, a little shame there, a few sentences like, "A real man would." And he's swiping his card, changing his plans, compromising his boundaries, and apologizing for having needs. If you don't know what you're worth, you will always overpay. You'll overpay with your time, your money, your energy, and your sanity. You'll call it love while your self-respect quietly dies in the background. Here's the brutal truth. Most men never sit down and define their value, so they let women do it for them. And guess what? The definition is always convenient for her and costly for him. In this video, I'm going to break down exactly how women exploit men who don't know their value, the subtle tactics they use, the red flags you ignore, and how to flip the script so you stop being the emotional ATM and start being a man who cannot be used. Because until you understand this, it doesn't matter how nice you are, how much you provide, or how hard you try, you'll always attract people who see you as a resource, not a partner. The problem isn't that women are selfish. The problem is that you've never been taught how to protect your own value. So if you've ever felt drained, unappreciated, and confused in a relationship, like you're doing everything right and somehow still losing, this message is for you. Stay with me, because once you see the game, you can never unsee it. Part 1. The Origin of Exploitation. Most men don't realize they're being exploited because it doesn't start with manipulation. It starts with good intentions. Men are raised to believe that their worth is directly tied to how much they can offer others. From childhood, boys hear messages like, "Be helpful," "Be a gentleman," "Take care of others," while very rarely hearing, "Protect your boundaries," "Value yourself," or "You deserve reciprocity." So when they enter relationships, they default to overgiving. Not because they're weak, but because they think that's how love works. They believe effort equals appreciation. They believe sacrifice equals loyalty. They believe if they just do enough, someone will finally see their worth. That's the first mistake. When your identity is built around earning approval, you become blind to exploitation. Women don't need to consciously plan to use men like this. It happens naturally. A woman who notices that a man will bend over backward to keep her attention doesn't need to provide value. She simply needs to withhold it. She learns that if she acts disappointed, he tries harder. If she compares him to other men, he feels inadequate and overcompensates. If she withdraws affection, he works to fix things. This is how exploitation begins. Not with abuse, but with imbalance. Not with control, but with dependency. Not with dominance, but with validation. Most men are never told that relationships should be mutual. They think love is something they must prove, while women simply have to exist. A man without self-defined value doesn't ask, "Is this woman good for me?" He only asks, "How can I be good enough for her?" That shift sounds small, but it changes everything. When a man doesn't know his value, he tolerates disrespect disguised as jokes. He apologizes for setting boundaries. He assumes relationship problems are always his fault. He believes losing her is worse than losing himself. And once a woman realizes he's more afraid of abandonment than mistreatment, she gains silent power. She doesn't need strength to control him. She just needs his insecurity. He becomes a resource, emotionally, financially, socially, sexually, not a partner, a provider of benefits. Here's the harsh part. Men rarely wake up to this dynamic until they're exhausted, broke, drained, resentful, or abandoned. And even then, they don't say, "She used me." They say, "I wasn't enough." That's how deep the conditioning goes. True exploitation doesn't feel like exploitation while it's happening. It feels like responsibility. It feels like commitment. It feels like being a man. But the truth is this: you can't be exploited by someone who values you, but you can be destroyed by someone who values what you give more than who you are. This is where change begins, not by blaming women, but by recognizing the role that self-neglect plays in creating one-sided relationships. Until a man learns to value himself, he'll continue to confuse exploitation with love. Part 2. The tactics. Women use exploitation doesn't always look like manipulation, abuse, or obvious control. Most of the time, it's subtle, socially normalized, and even celebrated. A woman who exploits a man who doesn't know his value doesn't need force. She uses emotional leverage, unspoken expectations, and cultural narratives that reward her and shame him. The dynamic is psychological, not physical, and most men don't recognize it until the damage is done. One of the most common tactics is guilt. A man who seeks validation is terrified of disappointing the woman he cares about. So when she says things like, "If you loved me, you'd do this," or "You're choosing yourself over us," he interprets boundaries as betrayal. She doesn't have to ask directly. She just frames refusal as emotional abandonment. He ends up saying yes to things that drain him just to avoid feeling like he failed her. Another tactic is shame. Instead of questioning the request, she questions his identity. A real man would, or other guys do this for their girlfriends. He doesn't want to be seen as inadequate, so instead of defending himself, he overcompensates. Shame turns self-respect into insecurity, and insecurity into compliance. Then there's withholding. When affection, intimacy, support, or attention are delivered only when he behaves in a way that benefits her, he becomes trained to earn connection. He stops acting from personal choice and starts performing for emotional rewards. This dynamic creates a relationship where he gives more and receives less, yet still believes he's the problem. Comparison is another subtle strategy. Comments about exes, celebrity men, or even friends can create silent competition. "My friend's boyfriend takes her on trips," or "real couples do, ante." Instead of evaluating whether the request is fair, the man focuses on measuring up. Comparison shifts the goal from a healthy relationship to proving worth. Emotional escalation also plays a role. If expressing boundaries leads to arguments, tears, or accusations, many men simply stop asserting themselves to keep the peace. A man who avoids conflict becomes easy to dominate because the cost of honesty feels higher than the cost of compliance. He learns to sacrifice silently. Finally, there's entitlement. This doesn't need manipulation, just expectation. A woman may believe she deserves resources, effort, and loyalty simply for being present. When a man doesn't know his value, he reinforces that entitlement by giving without requiring reciprocity. The relationship becomes transactional, but only one party pays. The danger isn't just what she takes, it's what he stops giving to himself. He stops investing in his goals because he's funding hers. He stops nurturing friendships because she demands attention. He stops growing because she fears him outgrowing her. Over time, the man believes this is normal, even noble. But love without balance isn't love, it's consumption. And the longer he stays unaware, the deeper the dependency becomes. Part 3. Why men allow exploitation. No man wakes up one morning and consciously chooses to be exploited. It doesn't happen because he enjoys suffering or lacks intelligence. It happens because his identity is built on a flawed foundation. Men allow exploitation not because they are weak, but because they are conditioned to believe that their value must be proven, earned, or purchased through sacrifice. When you think love is something you win rather than something that is mutual, you'll tolerate dynamics that drain you just to feel chosen. One of the core reasons men allow exploitation is fear of abandonment. Most men are taught that women are the gatekeepers to love, intimacy, companionship, and validation. So when a woman threatens to leave, directly or indirectly, he doesn't see it as a natural part of relationship compatibility. He sees it as failure. He would rather betray himself than risk being alone. The emotional cost of walking away feels greater than the cost of staying, even if staying destroys him. Another reason is identity tied to service. Men are conditioned to believe that providing value is their purpose. That can be noble, but without boundaries, it becomes a trap. A man who sees himself only as the protector, the provider, the fixer, or the problem solver loses the ability to receive love without earning it. He becomes addicted to being needed. And when your value depends on fulfilling others' needs, you stop questioning whether those needs are fair. There's also low relational self-esteem. A man who believes he's lucky to have any female attention at all doesn't set standards. He clings to whoever chooses him. He confuses availability with compatibility. When he doesn't believe he can attract high-quality women, he overvalues the woman in front of him and undervalues himself. He stays not because she's amazing, but because he fears he cannot do better. Additionally, men often romanticize struggle. They're told real love is proven through hardship. Fight for her. Win her back. Never give up. They interpret resistance as passion, chaos as chemistry, and drama as depth. A healthy relationship feels too easy because they've been conditioned to equate suffering with emotional significance. So they stay in dysfunctional dynamics believing endurance is a virtue. There's also validation addiction. When a man's self-worth is externally sourced, he becomes dependent on the approval he receives from women. Compliments, affection, attention, and sexual intimacy become emotional currency. Instead of asking whether he is respected, he asks whether he is desired. The relationship becomes a feedback loop that feeds his insecurity rather than his growth. Finally, men allow exploitation because they lack a strong internal value system. If a man doesn't define his standards, someone else will. And those standards will always be designed to benefit them, not him. A man stops being exploited the moment he realizes this truth. You don't need to be chosen to be valuable. You are valuable first, then you choose. Until he believes that, he will continue to accept relationships that cost him more than they give. Part 4. The cost of being needed, not valued. The real danger of being exploited isn't the money you spend, the effort you waste, or the time you lose. It's what you become in the process. When a man doesn't know his value, relationships don't just drain him, they reshape him. He stops being a whole person and becomes a utility, a provider, a therapist, a chauffeur, a problem solver, a wallet, a placeholder for emotional security. He becomes needed, but never valued. And that difference is life-changing. Being needed feels meaningful at first. It gives a purpose, a role, a sense of importance. A woman relying on him for emotional stability, financial support, or constant attention may make him feel irreplaceable. But the truth is harsh. Being needed is conditional. The moment his usefulness runs out, so does the relationship. If she values the benefits he provides rather than the man he is, he becomes replaceable the second someone else provides more. That's why so many men get blindsided when they're left after years of sacrifice. They say things like, "After everything I did for her." But that's precisely the problem. He was offering effort as currency, hoping to buy loyalty or love. When effort is transactional, there's always a better offer. The tragedy is not that she leaves, it's that he loses himself before she does. The cost goes deeper. When a man gives more than he receives, his identity erodes. He stops prioritizing his health because she needs time. He stops pursuing his career goals because she needs emotional reassurance. He cuts off friends because she needs constant access. He abandons growth because she fears he'll outgrow her. Eventually, he looks in the mirror and doesn't recognize who he's become. Smaller, quieter, tired, resentful. He loses confidence because he keeps investing without return. He loses ambition because his efforts never feel enough. He loses self-respect because he betrays his own standards. And here's the dark irony. The more he sacrifices, the less she respects him. Not because she's cruel, but because humans instinctively devalue what comes too easily and admire what must be earned. When a man gives everything without boundaries, she stops seeing his effort as generosity and starts seeing it as obligation. Over time, appreciation turns to expectation, and expectation turns to entitlement. Then resentment appears, not just from him, but from her. She starts feeling burdened by his devotion, even though she demanded it. She stops being attracted to him because he derives identity from serving her rather than becoming himself. She leaves for someone who prioritizes himself, not her, and he's left believing he failed. But it wasn't failure, it was misalignment. He built his life around her, and she built hers around herself. Here's the painful truth. Being loved for what you provide isn't love. It's dependence. Being valued means your presence matters even when you have nothing to offer. A man must choose which version of himself he wants to be, because the cost of being needed without being valued is your entire identity. Part 5. The turning point. When a man finally wakes up, every exploited man eventually reaches a moment where something clicks. It might happen quietly, sitting alone in his car after another argument where he apologized just to keep the peace. It might happen dramatically, like discovering betrayal after years of loyalty. Or it might happen gradually, a slow burning realization that he's shrinking while she's growing off the energy he provides. But at some point, a man wakes up and asks the question he's been trained to avoid. If I stopped giving everything, what would I actually receive? That question is terrifying because it forces him to confront reality. Most of what he calls love is conditional. It's affection tied to convenience. It's approval tied to obedience. It's intimacy tied to usefulness. When a man finally steps back and evaluates his relationship objectively, he notices patterns he ignored for years. She only compliments him when she wants something. She only acts affectionate when he spends money. She only gives attention when he's available on demand. She only respects him when he sacrifices himself. This realization doesn't just expose the relationship, it exposes the programming. He sees that he's been operating from fear, not choice. He's been negotiating for love instead of receiving it freely. He's been auditioning for a role in a life he never agreed to play. And that's when anger shows up, not at her, but at himself. The anger is necessary. It's the emotional signal that he's been betraying his own worth. But waking up is only the first phase. The next step is the hardest. He stops fixing everything. He stops rushing to solve her problems. He stops rearranging his life to avoid conflict. He stops giving more than he receives. He stops allowing guilt to control him. And for the first time, he asks, "What do I want?" That single question threatens the entire foundation of the relationship. Some women become supportive because they were never exploiting him to begin with. They push him to grow, encourage boundaries, and respect his shift. Others become angry, defensive, or manipulative because they benefited from his blindness. They accuse him of changing, getting selfish, or not caring anymore. What they really mean is, "You stopped prioritizing my needs over your own." This resistance is the final test. If a man collapses here, he returns to the cycle. If he stands firm, his entire identity begins to evolve. He rediscovers hobbies, friendships, physical health, financial goals. His energy comes back, his confidence returns, his purpose reawakens. Ironically, this is when women start finding him more attractive. Not because he changed for them, but because he finally changed for himself. A man who knows his value becomes calm, grounded, selective, and unshakable. He stops asking to be chosen and starts choosing. He stops craving validation and starts commanding respect. He stops giving love desperately and starts giving it intentionally. This turning point is not about rejecting women. It's about reclaiming himself. Part 6. Rebuilding value from within. Once a man wakes up to how he's been exploited, he faces a crossroads. He can either swing to resentment, blaming women, swearing off relationships, adopting a bitter worldview, or he can rebuild himself from the inside out. The first path feels powerful at first, but it keeps him reactive and wounded. The second path makes him a man who doesn't need validation, doesn't fear loss, and doesn't negotiate his identity. That path is harder, but it transforms him into someone who cannot be exploited again. Rebuilding value starts with one fundamental shift. Your worth is based on who you are, not what you provide. Most men have never even considered that. They're so used to earning affection through effort that they feel uncomfortable receiving anything freely. When someone respects them without asking for something in return, they feel unworthy or suspicious. That discomfort reveals how deeply their self-worth was tied to service. To rebuild, a man must first confront the areas where he abandoned himself. His health, neglected. His friendships, ignored. His hobbies, forgotten. His goals, deferred. His boundaries, erased. These aren't random losses. They are the exact pillars of his identity. Without them, he has nothing to stand on. So the rebuilding process isn't about becoming harder or colder. It's about becoming whole. He starts by restoring self-respect, the foundation of all value. That means keeping promises to himself instead of breaking them for someone else's comfort. If he says he'll go to the gym, he goes. If he sets financial goals, he prioritizes them. If he says he needs space, he protects it. Every time he chooses himself, his identity strengthens. Next comes boundaries. Not walls, not avoidance, boundaries. He stops explaining or defending them. He states them calmly and enforces them consistently. A man with boundaries communicates from strength, not fear. He doesn't ask permission to live his life. Then comes purpose. Men deteriorate when they orbit women instead of goals. When his mission becomes the center of his life, relationships enhance him. They no longer define him. Women become a complement, not a compass. Rebuilding also requires detachment from validation. He learns to enjoy compliments without depending on them. He enjoys intimacy without needing it for self-worth. He engages in relationships because he chooses them, not because he fears being alone. Most importantly, he stops negotiating with people who demand his sacrifice but don't offer growth. The new version of him isn't impressed by beauty, attention, or emotional neediness. He values character, respect, alignment, and mutual investment. And here's the irony. When a man rebuilds himself, people who once overlooked him now admire him. Women who once led him now follow him. Friends who doubted him now seek his advice. He becomes the man he always tried to prove he was, except now he doesn't need an audience. This isn't about becoming selfish. It's about becoming sovereign, so that love becomes a choice, not a transaction. Part 7. Becoming a man who cannot be used. The final stage isn't about revenge, dominance, or winning against anyone. It's about becoming a man whose life is so grounded, so purpose-driven, so self-defined that exploitation isn't even possible. Not because he's guarded or paranoid, but because he's aligned, aware, and uncompromising about who he is and what he deserves. A man who cannot be used has a different mindset from the man he once was. He no longer approaches relationships from need, fear, or scarcity. He doesn't become loyal just because someone gives him attention, and he doesn't feel pressure to earn affection through performance. He doesn't enter relationships to fill emotional gaps. He enters them to share abundance. His life is full on its own. A woman can enhance it, but she cannot define it. This transformation begins when he understands that love without self-respect becomes slavery, and boundaries without self-worth become empty lines no one honors. He no longer tolerates one-sided relationships because he no longer tolerates being one-sided with himself. Instead of asking, "What do I need to do to keep her?" he asks, "Does this relationship contribute to my growth, peace, and purpose?" This new version of him stops being impressed by superficial qualities, looks, affection, attention, validation, and starts evaluating women based on values. Does she support his goals or distract from them? Does she respect his time or consume it? Does she inspire him or drain him? Does she add peace or create chaos? Does she grow with him or demand he shrink? A man who knows his value no longer chases women who crave resources. He chooses women who bring reciprocity. And when the wrong type of woman enters his life, she leaves quickly, not because he rejects her aggressively, but because she gains nothing from a man who won't sacrifice himself for approval. His strength becomes his filter. He also builds male brotherhood, something society discourages because united men are confident, independent, and harder to control. He surrounds himself with men who pursue excellence, not validation. In these circles, men sharpen each other. They hold each other accountable, not compliant. They value achievement, ambition, discipline, and truth, not attention from women. The final evolution is internal peace. When a man no longer needs to be chosen, he chooses deliberately. When he no longer fears being alone, he becomes selective. When he no longer relies on validation, he becomes respected. This doesn't make him emotionless. It makes him self-possessed. And here's the ultimate paradox. A man who cannot be used is far more attractive than a man who tries to be useful. Women respect him because he respects himself. Women value him because he values himself. Women stay because they want him, not because he chases them. This journey isn't about avoiding women. It's about becoming a man whose life is already full, so relationships become partnership, not dependence. A man who knows his value doesn't fear loss. He fears wasting time. He fears abandoning his purpose. He fears betraying himself. And that's the man who cannot be used.